So this is a review for Sandy Claus. And with me today, well, he's not Santa Claus, but it's my good friend SC McPeter, or SC McSanta Claus. Say hi.
Merry springtime, everyone.
Or autumn for Anthony.
Just a few bits of info to get underway. So as mentioned, this is a review for Sandy Claus, released on the 2nd of April 1955. It's the 736th in the series, and it's directed by Friz Freleng. You can find this beautiful restoration on the Looney Tunes Platinum Collection Volume 3 Blu-ray and DVD set. I have a link below to that set. It's not on YouTube unless Warner Brothers themselves choose to upload it on their own channel, as it is under copyright. But in case you haven't seen this one, I mean, it's your typical Sylvester and Tweety short, where this time around, Granny takes Tweety to the beach, and Sylvester tries to get Tweety, but there is a whole bunch of water in the way, and we'll certainly go through it. Oh, and Granny just is in a bikini, so yeah. But there's actually quite a bit of trivia for this one, where if you watch this short, you probably wouldn't think too much of it in terms of history, but there's actually quite a bit here, funnily enough. So I'll go through a few of them. The working title was See Tweety, and I think it was just a generic name. I think you mentioned to me before recording it's probably just something Art Davis wrote.
Yeah, in a document signed September 25th, 1952, Davis was paid $300. We'll get into why he was getting paid for this, but it says tentative title was just See Tweety for what became this cartoon. Evidently, it was probably just a working title, and Freleng probably just added the name Sandy Claus to the end. I kind of get the impression that what a cartoon was called was never too important in the Freleng unit. It was a means to an end.
Exactly, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, of course. But this is actually the final time Bea Benaderet voiced Granny, and it's also the final use of this design, because if you watch the Looney Tunes, because they obviously show different shorts from different eras, you'll notice that Granny looks one way, and then will look another way in the more modernist type, sort of shorter and fatter and all that. But then they would come back to this design in the 90s where she was using Space Jam and also the Sylvester and Tweety mysteries and all that. So they sort of gone from one to the other. But in the Golden Age, this is the last time. Plus, also, Bea Benaderet, she wouldn't voice anything else after this. It's my understanding that she became well in demand and she wouldn't do any voiceovers, I believe, until, of course, some Stone Age animated show. I can't remember the name. I wonder what that was.
Maybe hit your head on a stone to find out.
But I might get some flint from those stones in my eye, you know. But anyway, I'm sure I'll remember it at some point. Oh, and those over-the-top, old-fashioned gags that was part of this character, they would actually end up being toned down somewhat after this. We'll see one of those in this very short as well. But I noticed that they do tone that down that little bit. I mean, that's at least my observation anyway. Now, if you look at the credits, you can notice that it's co-written by Art Davis, but you've got some info about that.
So, as I mentioned in the document, Davis was paid $300 for the storyboard of this cartoon. I guess this was something he did in his spare time, perhaps to reflect creative urges. He was more than an animator. We know he could direct, but he also could write, as you can see. But according to Davis himself in an interview, he completely wrote this short, and I guess not much was changed outside of Freleng's direction, but the only reason Warren Foster got a credit is because Foster presented the cartoon to Freleng for him, and he did not have the authority to remove Foster's name, despite the fact Foster didn't do any writing on this cartoon. And you can almost see that it really is just Art Davis's story, but I am glad he got the top credit for this and the animation. He did some really good animation in this cartoon, I think.
Yeah, because one thing people may notice as we go through this short is how different a lot of it actually is, in a sense that you might have some wild takes in Sylvester Tweety shorts, but then you would have calmer moments there. But I noticed that the animation here, it's a lot more wilder more often. Nothing wrong with that. I actually think it's quite interesting to see. But yeah, it's just due to the fact that this is one of the last shorts that was made pre-shutdown, the last one to, I guess, be finished, right?
Definitely one of the last ones. Davis himself was, I'm going to make comparisons to an animator from MGM, Mike Law, who was Avery's top animator, started in the late 40s, and they were sort of on the same page of cutting back drawings and in-betweens. And Davis probably had an easier time doing that, not just because of lower budgets in general at Warner's, but also just the fact that they were a bit more willing to do those kind of experiments at Warner's. But man, there are some really interesting ways that Davis gets economical with the drawings, but still draws loose enough where it's really appealing. And after the shutdown, it looks like Davis's assistant changed, and whoever was assisting his work pretty much just left his drawings alone. It becomes a lot looser and more unhinged in a way. We'll see that soon.
Indeed, we certainly will. And also, this short was nominated for an Oscar, but it ended up losing to a short called When Magoo Flew, which is a good short. I actually like that one. But it's kind of interesting. When Magoo Flew was written by Ted Pierce, who was sort of floating around at this point in time, but he was one of the main three Warner Brothers writers, so Mike Maltese, Warren Foster, and Ted Pierce. But Pierce, I get the impression he's seen as the lesser of the three, so it's kind of interesting that he ends up winning the Oscar. Well, not him personally, but he helped win the Oscar, whereas Foster wrote this one and he didn't. So, yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
Well, everyone sort of viewed Pierce in that way, but you still got to hand it to him. He has his name attached to a lot of very funny cartoons, and he did a lot of funny voices in the Warner cartoons. But I do find that definitely interesting. All of the writers, the three main writers, had their names attached to an Oscar. Maltese for Sentimental Reasons, Foster for Speedy Gonzales, and Birds Anonymous. Ted Pierce was on Tweety Pie as well.
They've all had their glory, so it's not like revenge or anything, but I just thought it was interesting. But as you say, Speedy Gonzales, that's going to be coming up very soon in the form of a review.
He's running down the town now.
Yep, indeed. And I have to also mention the whole bikini thing, because the whole thing is played for laughs. So you've got Granny hinting in the beginning, hey, I'm going to wear one of those bikinis I've been hearing about, and then we all know the gag's going to be, there's going to be some turn of the century thing, and sure enough it is.
Now you wait right here, Tweety, until Granny puts on her new bikini bathing suit. Here I come!
Just to put this into perspective, because bikinis are, well, just about everywhere, of course, but back then, bikinis became really popular in Europe after World War II. In America, the idea of the bikini was slowly trickling through. It was only really in the 60s, once the Californian surf culture took off, that's when bikinis really became more widespread. So you'd have your areas where it might be a bit more liberal than others. Bikinis were certainly known, but in certain parts of the country, it'd be like, no, I will not have you wear that, and so on. So just to put that into perspective for people. In terms of this short, I hadn't really seen it that much beforehand, aside from seeing it on the Platinum Collection that one time, and I honestly forgot about it. In fact, the title itself, I mean, come on. Do I really have to mention it's a pun on Santa Claus, Sandy Claus, Sand on Claus, and blah, blah, blah? I'm sure you all get the pun right there, even though this has got nothing to do with Christmas. Although, since in Australia it's summer with Christmas time, it's actually kind of closer there. So I will say that. But I forgot how fun this was. Is this one of those masterpieces that one of the greatest Looney Tunes ever made? Not really. It's your standard Sylvester and Tweety, sure, but when it's done well like this, you don't care. You just laugh your head off at just how ridiculous a lot of it actually is.
Yeah, there's plenty of cartoons by other studios where it's just gag to gag to gag, and then it slows down for an ending, but when you get gags this good and you get directors and animators this on top of their game, when you're a Warner cartoon, it kind of means a lot more because you're getting a little bit more. One thing that did impress me was the way that the story shifts a little bit, because we sort of get the impression that it's just going to be standard try and fail, but it moves in different ways. We go from just standard to then we get the tide setting in, and then we get Granny trying to help Sylvester to rescue Tweety.
Yeah, so you do get those twists and turns. And it's not the first time Foster's done this. He's done a few shorts where you think it's going to be a stock standard chase short, but it ends up having enough twists in it that you're like, oh, it actually holds your interest because it's something different, something unexpected. And here it goes from, as you say, standard setup, but then the water becomes, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it the villain or antagonist, so it becomes a character in a sense in this one, all those waves coming in. Then when you think it's just going to be, I suppose, a Sylvester and Tweety Roadrunner type short where it's just gag after gag and nothing else, Granny comes back into the picture and it changes up again. So I think it's interesting.
It is pretty much a try and fail type cartoon, but there are little shifts here and there to make it more engaging than a typical cartoon would be, where it's just pain to pain for a cat and mouse. But here it does work very well. I would suspect that Davis himself came up with the idea to set on the beach, but if Foster himself gave him just like a one-sentence idea to do it, I wouldn't be terribly surprised, but just going by what Davis said, I'll go with that. Foster didn't really do much on this cartoon except present it. But it is funny listening to some of Davis's reflections back and back. 'Cause he always tended to mention in his interviews that he would always remiss about how violent the cartoons were. He came up sort of grandfatherly in that way, because he always seemed to dismiss it as something that wasn't truly funny. But he always said that it was funny because it was animated well and put over well by the directors. And boy, he really does write some violent gags here.
100%. And we'll definitely look through all of it now. And so we open up, and we hear Granny sing a song, and I've always loved when Granny sings a song in some of these shorts. I don't know if she continues to do that so much afterwards, so post-shutdown, but up until now, she does this quite a bit. And if you're wondering what song she's singing a song called Love Ya, written by Peter DeRose and Charles Tobias, and perhaps the most famous rendition, or at least around that time, would have been the version sung by Doris Day.
Love you, honey. Love you, honey. Oh, if you only knew. Love you, honey. Love you, honey. Please remember, honey, to love me too.
I know it's been covered by a few people afterwards, but I guess Granny's a regular old Doris Day. The only animated characters you see in this are Sylvester, Tweety, Granny, and some sharks. That's it. In fact, the only other human you see is just one person sunbathing in the back, and that's part of the background.
Yeah, I mean, this tended to be more of an East Coast thing, animating crowds. Crowds were not typically done in the West Coast studios except for Disney, or sometimes even Walter Lantz, because that was the New York studio in California for all intents and purposes. One thing a lot of the West Coast studios lacked were scenes where there would be lots of crowds, and that included beaches and carnivals. Because I'm thinking his better half as well, where Daffy and Let's were the only people at the carnival.
It's just them being economical, and there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, you don't even think about it unless you're actually studying these things like we are, so it's perfectly fine. So Granny puts Tweety down, and I just love the fact that she just likes to bring a bird everywhere. I just think that the idea in itself is just ridiculous, and that it's hilarious, at least to me. But anyway.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, so she just puts Tweety down on a unassuming rock, so she doesn't know there's going to be a tide coming in. And we set up the gag for later on that she's going to put one of those new bikini suits that she's heard all about. And I guess if you've never seen a Sylvester Tweety short before and you see this for the first time, the gag will probably hit harder. But because we've seen a lot of these, we know what to expect. But you know what? It's still funny. I still think it's hilarious.
It probably was a little bit of a shock gag in some areas when it first played.
So it's not just gag after gag. We get the cute moments where, in this case, Tweety's like, yep, I'm at the beach too. So clearly he's going to enjoy himself. And he puts on those really cool glasses, which I believe that design was like something very fashionable around this time.
That's an Art Davis shot. Usually Virgil Ross would handle something like that, but he almost draws Tweety sort of a ratty if you look closely at some of the extremes.
But it looks pretty cool. I like those glasses. You know, it's a nice little thing because you can't have only gags, nothing else. You've got to have moments of character, and a little shot like that can actually plus the short, and I think it works well here.
Yeah.
But we get a bit where, if you're familiar with Warren Foster, he likes to reuse gags. Maybe Foster added this bit because if you've seen the short A Fractured Leghorn, there's a bit with the McKimson cat where the worm is being made to go onto the fishing hook and the cat takes out a gun and makes him go. Sylvester does the same thing here. So maybe Foster just punched up the script with a few more gags like that.
They may have punched up a little bit. Maybe Freleng just went in and just had Warren go over a few pieces, but I genuinely think Davis wasn't exaggerating. He may not have even seen the final or remembered it well enough to know if there were that many changes.
It's one of those things that's lost to time, but in any case, gags get reused. This case, the audiences wouldn't have known or cared. It's just an observation, nothing more, and it's still a funny gag. It just seeing Sylvester with a gun is always hilarious. I love how the worm is animated like it has arms. And this gag, I love the payoff though. Like the worm goes in, and then you unexpectedly see this giant fish, and I'm assuming the worm is now dead, and Sylvester just says, there must be an easy way to get some sustenance.
There must be an easier way than this for a pussycat to get sustenance.
I noticed that when he crawls up against the little fishing boat, it's 13, which highlights the bad luck Sylvester's going to face.
Such a great bit. I did not expect that. Again, I hadn't seen this in such a long time that I forgot most of it, and that just came out of nowhere, and I thought that was a great payoff. And we get the usual, I think the audience is kind of expected by this point with Sylvester and Tweety, where Tweety says, I taught it to a putty tat, complete with his green glasses this time. And the whole thing is like a misdirection where you think it's just going to be a standard stock chase thing where Sylvester gets the cage and he goes, but no, we get the wave.
I did call a putty cat.
That scene of him charging towards the bird cage, it's just a small stretch of a drawing, but he leaves the paws behind. It's a really interesting animation. I think Art Davis himself must have done that because he would be the kind of person to do a big action shot cutting back on drawings like that.
Quite possibly, yeah. But we see the wave, and again, as I mentioned, the wave is sort of like a character in this one. But at first, you don't think much of it. You think it's just going to be, oh yeah, just a wave and see you later. But then once you see the wave continuing on, it becomes a running gag in this one. It's really good. I love the detail when we see some wild animation of Sylvester, and I love the little detail where the water rises, but then there's this one tiny bit where it looks like some gets into Sylvester's eyes and he blinks.
It looks like Davis himself did a lot of this, especially when he's coughing up. That's Art Davis, and Sylvester's almost popping from pose to pose in some of those pieces.
It's so bizarre, like some of that stuff, and this is a great one for people to look at if you want to animate more loosely how you can achieve this kind of thing, for sure.
Yeah, it compares favorably to Mike Loff, who himself also directed, and he was a great director too.
And so now Tweety's stuck on a rock, and again, you think that the rest of the short is just going to be this. And we all know because I've already spoiled it, it's not, but you still get a few gags involving this. So Tweety's stuck, Tweety's like, help, help. And Sylvester is going to help him, and Tweety thinks he's going to actually save him. I wonder if the people who made the Sylvester and Tweety mysteries took this one as inspiration, because a lot of that show seems to be like that.
It sort of did establish what became a lot of Sylvester and Tweety on autopilot in a way, where it was try and fail with a few different twists.
Yep, we've seen that, I guess, a million times, a similar sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is something we've seen a lot. Of course, the lion runs out, he falls into the water. So we get a few blackout gags. That's the first one.
This is certainly where I think Davis's story comes in, because one thing Davis emphasized to Milt Gray and others in the cartoons he directed, he wanted to achieve smoothness in the pacing, which is that you kept going at a certain pace and pace building up to it, and you couldn't move away from that unless you had a really good reason. And you can see evidence of this because one thing Davis really loved, even though it's not here, are cross dissolves. They're all over his cartoons at Columbia and Warner Brothers. I guess because it kept up the energy in a way that a blackout wouldn't, and it almost shows in the transition between the first gag and the second one where he's on the boat, because it isn't a cutaway, it isn't a blackout. We instead just hear Tweety frantically asking for more help from the Putty Cat, and it just cuts again to Sylvester perfectly fine. I don't know how accepted that would have been, but it works really well, I must say.
And I just love the whole thing with the boats, though. I mean, you'd think Sylvester would have checked that unhook it, but no, he just goes on it. I just like how the boat gets ripped and Sylvester ends up going down with the ship. Why not? I just like that. He just accepts his fate. He's like, oh, well, I'm going down with this ship. But again, this kind of reminds me of what a Roadrunner short would be, where Sylvester now used a motor on water skis. This gag, well, it should be pretty self-explanatory why he sort of knocks the wind out of you if you really notice what's going on there. All I say is, ouch. At the end result, that
Great
ouch.
staging of that gag.
Yes, exactly. And the next bit, again, took me off guard here. So he blows up some inflatables and he goes into the water. Now, you wouldn't normally see those sort of inflatables today, but those were the style of the time where if you're learning to swim, you'd tie that around you and that would help you float. So that's what they are. But I like how he just goes in the water and then he just gets randomly circled by sharks.
He isn't even pulling the water, it just immediately happens.
Exactly. And if you pay close attention, again, this is a cost cutting coming into play. So he goes under the water, but as soon as he pops up, the damage is already done. So you don't even see the damage happen. It's just before damage, then after damage. And that's it. It's just so quick. But I love the topper gag though. So when he ends up going back on the surface, he just acts like Tarzan, just cause, and he collapses. I'd put money on Art Davis coming up with that gag.
Yeah,
It's
that's definitely Art Davis doing that. I could almost imagine it being an Emery Hawkins scene in one of his cartoons.
The next bit is where you think, oh yeah, they're just going to continue got more and more of these kind of gags, but no. Granny comes back into the picture for the third act, and I love the animation of her acting all giddy in her turn of the century bikini. That animation is just, I don't know, I love it.
It's immediate cut. There's no like transition to her figuring it out and more gags. It almost comes at the perfect time because Sylvester enters in as the lifeguard, and I really, really, really love this animation because it's just a pop like from pose to pose, and it's really funny, and Sylvester has that great expression on his face. Just funny cartooning that I love.
And it's just, hey, Sylvester's a smart cat. He dresses up as a lifeguard. Why not? You know what I mean? It's just, it's such a great thing. I mean, granted, we all prefer when Sylvester cross-dresses, but this is good enough. I think this is a great choice nonetheless. But I love how prepared he is, but he ends up knocking himself out with a surfboard, thinking the tide should have been there, but it's not. And this gag is so perfectly timed where Granny tries to make him come to with a bucket of water, but then the wave comes in, knocks them both over, and the cherry on top, you didn't have to overdo it.
Suffering succotash. You didn't have to overdo it.
I love that he isn't able to register that a wave just came by, but he's able to register what Granny was about to do.
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
And also, I mentioned earlier about them moving towards a more stylized design for Granny. You can also see it in this scene because one thing that certainly happened later in the Freleng cartoons compared to some of the other cartoons is that they designed the characters or laid them out in a way that they would be locked in at profile view for some shots. And you can almost see it with Granny in this shot as well.
And also, she ends up helping Sylvester. Does she still think he's a lifeguard, or does she know that he's a cat now? She's just such a bizarre character in this one, but we don't care about the logic.
She's just so ecstatic she wants help for her Tweety pie.
Exactly, so I think she just doesn't care. Maybe she figured it out later on, I don't know. But we get the bit with the diving suit. And again, you got to wonder, where is everyone else? You'd think there'd be real lifeguards there helping out or whatever, but anyway, we'll put that aside too. But I like how the diving suit is just a very old-timey type diving suit. I wonder if that's something that she had in her car or something, or in her case, probably a horse and carriage maybe.
You probably just found it just lying around somewhere. Maybe someone else was wearing it to impress somebody.
I just love the gag here where Tweety's like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to save myself. And he just ends up saving himself, and Granny gets all excited. Oh, but Tweety, there he is. But she forgets all about the motor, which ends up switching off. And of course, what happens to the air? Sylvester ends up nearly suffocating because there's no air coming through. Because these days you might have air on your diving suit, of course, but back then this was the technology available at the time. I'm not sure how much it evolved by the 50s, but this was definitely a more of a turn of the century type suit anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure that this was still a standard during the 50s at least. Maybe it was getting revolutionized for us, but this still would have been what most people expected. And the other thing I really like is that there's no real wits about Tweety getting aggravated. He just finally snaps. And I do like the little beat that Granny, she just still doesn't realize, and she still wants to help the Putty Tat, and that's exactly what she does. And she overdoes it.
And sure enough, he floats in the air, and Sylvester ends up escaping via the escape hatch like it's a plane of some sort, even as a parachute, which I thought was kind of weird and fun.
He almost expects this.
Yeah, but I love the ending, which you don't really expect, and sure enough, yeah, it's a bit of cost cutting here, but he ends up landing in a dog pound where she's like, I wonder where did that Putty Cat go? And he ends up in a dog pound.
Certainly a just reward.
And that's it. We end right there. It's kind of an abrupt ending, but you know what? We've resolved the story thread of Tweety being rescued, and that's that.
We go to what was evidently their favorite ending of this period, or just their favorite gag, the dog pound. I guess Davis wrote this in a way so he could animate fun gags, or at least make them work in a way, but you can sort of tell the budget cuts over time from Ain't She Tweet to Dog Pounded, and now this. There's not even any dogs.
And I just love the ending. Just, you don't even need to see the dogs. The sound effects is just enough. And I guess imagining what's going on is a lot more cruel than actually seeing it, I would imagine. So there is that as well. All right. So this one surprised me. Again, and I only saw it one time before. And I don't know if I even remember it that much, but watching this is such a pleasant surprise, such a breath of fresh air. It just shows that even at this stage, Frilly was still going really well for Sylvester Tweeties. I know he does somewhat go on autopilot a lot of the time, especially from now, but you still get some great ones like this one, and this one was so much fun. Honestly, some people might think I'm scoring too high on some of these, but I don't care. This one was great. 9 out of 10. What about you?
I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I like this cartoon an awful lot, but it's sort of the direction that the Sylvester and Trees would be going from this point forward. It still has a lot of shiny moments, and the animation is still there at least.
Yeah, 100%. But I think it's one of those little hidden gems, a term I love to use on this channel, and I think it's one worth watching. And yeah, you definitely track down the Looney Tunes Platinum Collection. I'm aware the Blu-ray's out of print. Hopefully it'll come back in some way. I know the DVD's out there, but still it is out there, and maybe Warner Brothers themselves will put it on their channel. They should. That will do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
That's all, folks.
What happened to that heroic pussycat? He certainly deserves a just reward.